Here we go. I'll re-intro Peter for the recording. Our guest today, Peter Melby, founder of Greystone Technology and now CRO at New Charter Technologies. I'm going to ask you so many questions, man. You're going to be wishing you hadn't accepted joining this call today, but hopefully we'll get into some of that stuff. So welcome, Peter. How are you,
Thanks.
man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's I guess this is like a consolation prize to actually hanging out, but I'll take it. It's Friday afternoon.
Well, I feel like we do a pretty good job of getting together whenever we are in the same place, despite
It's
it
very
taking
true.
it takes 2 days of the conference to usually find each other, but we
That's very
manage
true.
eventually. Yeah, we're texting like, "Are you here? Are you here? Where are you?" And so, like, and now that you have this extra job title of CRO at New Charter, and you're always meeting with new prospects that might join the New Charter platform and all that stuff, you always seem like a busy guy. But that's kind of like a great segue into a bit of this MSP evolution, because man, I just don't remember the M&A scene ever being this just busy. And I of course started 20 years ago, but
Yeah.
give me a bit of your high level impressions on what's happening.
I'll give you my impressions and a little bit of my experience. Yeah, we started an MSP 22 years ago, and like most people, it was kind of the prime time to start it. It didn't matter how much experience you had, because no matter, or didn't matter what your age was, because everyone had kind of had the same level of experience with computers and supporting office, technology and things like that. So it was it was a great time to start something. I don't think that any people who are doing that really were looking at it from an enterprise value perspective, at the beginning. It was a job, and it was a better job than a lot of people had. You kind of create your own, your own business, earn, well. And then I remember, I don't know, maybe it was 2008, 2009, first time we were looking at it and thinking, people start talking about, oh yeah, you can build a business, you could actually have enterprise value and potentially, exit at a multiple, and things like that. But it's still so far away from what most people were experiencing in reality. I remember a couple people came and talked to us about, hey, if we take your $1 million MSP and we get 5 of them and we smash them together and we build a $5 million MSP, we can turn around and sell that for more than 5 times what we bought the MSPs for. I'll make money. And from the early stages, I remember thinking, on paper, that makes a lot of sense, but no one really understands the nuances of what goes into this business. MSPs are incredibly easy businesses to start, but they're really, really hard businesses to scale. And ultimately, what we've connected on, Luis, a lot over the years is that we love to say it's a sexy industry, it's technology, all of that. It's services, it's people. Like, it's just a different kind of people. We're selling time. We're people selling people's time to other people who have technology needs. And so I think people industries are notoriously difficult from an M&A perspective. And so I think that there was probably a decade there where it was this pipe dream kind of a thing. We looked at it and said, oh, that would be cool someday. But it was really only the really scaled organizations that were getting, that there was attention paid to MSPs, but the only ones that were getting real action were the ones that were scaled. And I think that's what's changed to me in the past, 4 or 5 years, is that you've seen people, really, just a lot of normal MSPs getting successful, exits or transitions, from an ownership financial perspective, and then a lot of mixed results in terms of what happens to the actual business. And so you take this thing that was a passion project, it was never a side project, for me, but it was something like, oh, let's try this, and then it became something that had real value. And then we watched a lot of good businesses get destroyed. We watch some people, really do well, and I think that's what's driven a lot of the buzz is, yes, there is value in the market now in these businesses. It's a growing industry, but the conversations around how to do it and how to do it right, are also at a fever pitch.
It's so interesting to me to see, talking about how easy you mentioned it's easy to start an MSP business, but not necessarily as easy to scale it. But comparing, 20 years ago to today, it seems like there's still a bit of like maybe caution to the wind on the folks that just jump in because they want to start a business. And I see this in the Facebook groups, in the Discords and Slacks, like, hey, I just started a new MSP and signed my first client. And, you know, by sign my first client it's kind of like, you know, cousin Johnny here is doing IT for their uncle's business or something. And they're kind of just trying to figure it out. But the baseline, I think, of the entry level is certainly moving, at least on the cybersecurity front.
For sure.
But I think, again, the irony or the challenge is that I don't think the clients know that that baseline has moved. I think we just, you know, innately feel like this baseline has moved. So I think the damage that unprepared MSP starters are doing the industry is worse. And I think it's creating bigger problems for the MSPs that are trying to, you know, save these customers from those situations.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that the customers don't really know. I agree. I'm glad I'm not starting an MSP now. I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing then, you know, either, but no one did. So it was a little bit easier to, you know, just kind of figure it out. It's a hard time to do that, you know, in the midst of all the complexity. And we say often that IT IT used to be simple but hard, in the sense that there's really consistent systems across every business, but you needed to, you know, technicians to do almost anything on those systems, you know, set up a new user, all of that. Now IT is easy, you know, but complicated, because you can go spin up any cloud platform you want. But when you try to make it all work together for the sake of business, there's not a lot of IT people or historical IT talent that translates very well to that. And so you do have this you know, separation, you know, that's happened in the organizations that have figured out how to scale and matter more to businesses, you know, build middle management, you know, and generally not make them so personality driven businesses. But what is that? 1% of all MSPs, 2% of all MSPs that really fit that category. If you look at or just service providers in general, I mean, there's tens of thousands of them. So it's this weird industry where people, you know, even the biggest companies are still not big companies by general standards.
Yeah.
So I think that the clients, you know, don't see that until they feel the pain, you know, and then they get it. They have to go look for something else. They don't always know what they're looking for, you know. But yeah, it's not something that's readily noticeable right out of the gate.
I've always had this sense that because I was around with my MSP when sort of the VAR model was kind of the predominant thing, and true play MSP wasn't kind of yet cementing itself as the way to go. And I suspect you were as well. And I've always had this sense that the VAR model negatively influenced the way that a lot of MSPs actually go to market, even today. You know, because I feel like we, to our own demise, maybe chased every little bit of margin that we could just from the resale of product here or the resale of service there. And it was always, or not always, focused on the true delivery of services or business outcomes, any of that stuff. And that's been kind of the evolution, I think, in one way of where we started, and, you know, how it started and how it's going. But what are your thoughts on this influence from the VAR model?
That's funny. I guess I hadn't thought about it that directly, but you're right. It's funny how legacies get created, even absentmindedly, in some of that. I remember in 2001, we decided we didn't want to be a VAR. We didn't resell anything. We wanted to be a service organization. But I think that what you saw across the industry is that most IT people are not real creative with their business models. It's, you know, there was a model that worked, so let's keep doing that, you know, or let's start doing that, or here's, you know. And I don't think the vendors helped a lot, because this industry wouldn't exist as it is today without the vendor piece, you know, because MSP owners typically weren't real experienced business people. So they'd start their business, and then you know, those early vendors created, you know, found an opportunity, created solutions, and kind of created a captive market to sell to, and codified what we know now as the MSP market. And so I remember they, you know, them telling us, well, we're going to tell you how to build your business, tell you how to run your business, all of that. But it was all based on things that were not, you know, they were innovative billing models, you know, in the sense of flat fee services, and there was some monitoring, you know, attached to it. but you're right. A lot of it was still based in that, in those legacy positions. And when you don't have a really clear, innovative, understanding of where your profit comes from, and it comes from all these different spaces, then there's some diversity there, which can help, but also those things can get compressed real fast. I remember a lot of, and they weren't called MSPs at the time, but their services were break even, and their margin came in the hardware sales. So hardware sales started going down, at one point, and everyone looked at it and said, well, this business, like this industry's over. It's like, that didn't happen that way.
Well, a few weeks ago, we had Pete Schultz on from Applied Tech, and I think you kind of referenced it a moment ago, but he talked about sort of the challenge of dealing with bad revenue, or because not all revenue is necessarily good. But I think that's another legacy thing that comes from that original billing model, or just the original go-to-market way of doing business, which is, I don't think I ever said no to any business or any client in the first 10 years of running my MSP.
Yeah.
And then I think that created sort of the lack of space, the lack of breathing room to innovate in my own billing models, my own growth, my own scalability. And I think a lot of people kind of enter the market this way, whether it's break fix or a mix of break fix with recurring revenue, just because they can't, they have to take the business to sort of get started. And who are we to say you shouldn't do it that way, right? If it's putting food on the table. But it's an interesting challenge, right? And I think that's part of the evolution that I notice just about every MSP at some point is going through, no matter if they started a year ago or if they started 20 years ago. They seem to always come in through this break fix model, and then sort of have to force themselves to evolve at some point. So I wonder, like, where is the inflection point where like nobody wants to do break fix anymore? It's just obviously easy to start that way.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that there's this view, and this is where some of the separation comes in now, is that we love to live by these really simplified rules. I remember the number of quips that I've heard about, like, oh, you got to, kill 20% of your revenue, every year, because, or you gotta, you can only keep the clients that are profitable, at this level. You have to do managed services. You can't do break fix anymore. Like, you have, all of those are guidelines for people who need guidelines and some of that stuff. But I think if you look at really mature businesses and business models, there's a very, very different perspective on a lot of that. It's not as simple as just every contract has to be as profitable, and the ones that aren't, you get rid of. There's critical mass, of revenue. There's paths to profitability. There's seasonal, aspects of things. And sometimes I think MSPs got into a place where, they started looking at the world as really, really, really small, like just like the way that I view it. And we found a lot of benefit in the last 10 years of focusing on succeeding in the margins, of that, not just in this, okay, I'm going to get the customers who are just perfect for my business, which is maybe, 10%, of what could be the addressable market, if we had a broader, vision. Now, not every company is going to be that way, but that's what we did. And it was very, very successful. We grew a lot. We didn't grow at the expense of profitability, but we defined where the profitability needed to come from, and what our individual business at scale wanted to look like, rather than just, hey, here's the model, here's the cookie cutter, just follow these margins, follow these processes.
Yeah, I mean, I used a pretty big brush there, obviously, but I think lawyers have successfully proven the break fix model can be successful. But at the same time, it is, I think, what you're saying, you can either hit a glass ceiling as a 1, 2, 3 person operator, and just sort of find yourself just stuck, not able to scale that model, and then need to make the transition, which is just very disruptive, is I guess all that I was trying to observe about the transition. Because then people will naturally want to try and convert existing break fix customers to recurring model, and that's not always easy. And so that takes 2 to 3 years of, like, finding the new business and getting rid of the old business. And so it's just this really interesting crunch of time that seems to happen regularly in that evolution. But so I appreciate your thoughts. It's always on my mind.
I know. Yeah. It's a fast moving space for sure. So, I know there's a lot of topics that we talked about, diving into,
Yeah.
and a lot of ones that are, I mean, if we look at, I guess, where do you want to start?
Well, I think another thing that again I deal in sensations in many respects, and some of the sensations that I often pick up on, because my MSP was always small. Like I started as a one person shop, brought on a business partner, a second business partner, and we got up to 7 people. And from a revenue perspective, we did better than the average, I think, but it was always a small business, and even at 5 and 6 and 7, like I was always loathing the idea of hiring and how much time was spent in just the HR process of the business. But I know that other businesses definitely seem to go through these like phases of crunches in certain sizes, whether it's going from 10 to 15 people or 15 to 20, 20 to 25. And I don't know where the exact, little bumps are. But every time I ask this question, people be like, yeah, dude, when we went from like 20 to 25, it was so painstaking. And, I can't necessarily put a finger on it, but Greystone's a 100-person company. And so maybe tell me a little bit about some of those stages of evolution and some of the challenges each stage had.
Yeah, I'll oversimplify it because obviously it's been a long journey, but we were the company, that had the opposite mindset from what you did. I know we've connected on that a lot, and there's what we learned. Number one is that size does not equal maturity. Maturity does not equal size necessarily. Um, and you can be a very mature, smaller organization depending on partnerships and level of service and how you choose to serve clients and things like that. We decided pretty early on that we wanted to try to just continually grow year over year. And a lot of it for me was just a passion, for building with people, and also just a relentless desire to succeed where I saw other people fail. And so the people aspects ended up being that, in so many ways. And we were really naive at the beginning, thinking that if we just, if we have good intentions, and if we're not assholes, then we can, generally, do better than everybody else. Then you learn really fast that everybody has good intentions, around their people strategies and all of that. And it doesn't really solve any of our personnel issues. The humans are complicated. And so that's where, Greystone's about 150 employees now. And we joined the New Charter platform, which is people that know about it, have tagged it as, either low integration or non-integrated M&A, platform, which isn't fundamentally true. We prioritize, local relationships and local, site-based decision making, in the most critical areas of the business to support people, and clients, and avoid some of the other pitfalls that people see in M&A transactions. So we have 1,000 employees, across New Charter now, and it's been interesting to get in that critical mass of data to see, where, what does attrition look like in spaces? What works? What doesn't? Inside these organizations that join, our platform, and it's been fun to connect that into the passion that I had for just figuring out that people aspect. And but what we found is that the solutions are different than most people start out with in their MSPs. In their MSP, as you get started, it's I got to find someone who thinks like I do. You gotta find someone who, is willing to, to take the risk that I would take, who's entrepreneurial. Like, you're gonna need that at the beginning, or at least you feel like you do. And I did, I really needed someone to just kind of take things off of my plate, but think enough like me that I would trust them. And then you don't have much of a performance management strategy at that point. We're just in the trenches together, and we're going to make this work. And when it doesn't, we're going to get upset about it, and eventually that person probably burns out and leaves, or we make them a partner, so that when they're burnt out, they don't leave, and then, in those awkward scale moments, at the beginning, don't necessarily set us up well for the rest of our our scale journey. And what we've learned now is that culture does it does not happen successfully without being properly cultivated. And that looks a lot different than just caring about people, having good intentions, having a good benefits plan, and it's actually really diving headfirst into a lot of the people aspects, performance management, being deliberate about hiring, deliberate about management, and who of us was any good at that when we started our MSP? That's not why I started.
Hey, throwing shade right out of the gate here, man. Well, a couple of things that I want to ask you about, and it's maybe been a long enough time that you don't remember, but perhaps you've worked with some of the smaller businesses that joined New Charter. The idea of career mapping is super interesting to me, because I think a lot of people, two sides to this. You mentioned sort of just being able to find somebody that can be in the trenches with you, that you can trust to hand some things off to.
Yep.
That person, I think, is innately different than the person who's looking for a career path or a career journey in many respects. And the challenge for a lot of small MSPs is that they are career path less. There's kind of, one thing to do for the next, whoever knows how many years, because this is just the nature of a small business. I can't give you, 3 prongs on the ladder to climb over the next few years, because we just don't have that kind of skill. And so I'm curious to know, like, what you would say to a small MSP trying to cultivate a bit of this longevity when there's seemingly no career pathing to be offered.
Yeah. Decide what you want to be and hire appropriately. And that is my first, piece of advice there. And what I mean by that is that if you're the MSP that wants to be, small, balanced, focused, profitable, above scaling into something, significantly larger, if you're not building that empire, then you're going to, you want to hire someone that's going to be there forever. But to your point, if you don't have a forever position, you got to look at the reality of that. And sometimes it's okay to be a stepping stone, in some of that, as long as you're aware of it. And as long as you're kind of building around that, like, what is the realistic longevity, of a position, in that, and focus on, making it that, not an eternal, you've got as many rungs on the ladder as you need thing. If you're a really growth oriented company, as we were, we were really clear when people came on board, or we learned to be really clear when people came on board, to say, you're going to be here and it's going to look like there's no career advancement for you. I said, but if you look at the number of people in this organization that have a different job than when they were hired and what that time frame is, then you'll see that that's not true, because none of those positions existed when they came on board. It's the growth trajectory that creates the path for us. And you have an opportunity to not just have a career path, but be part of the direction of what that career path is going to lead to, and the structure, and all that, if you prove to have, the right capabilities. And so from the smaller sense, those are two very different conversations and very different things to plan for. You can't do both at the same time very well. And so if you're in the place where you have an identity crisis of, well, I don't really know who I want to be, that's probably going to hurt you the most. And the other piece of it, is, people aren't dumb. You can't really lie to them, and say, oh yeah, we've got we're going to have plenty of options, if they can't look back, and see that there's a history, of having some of that. The other big thing, the other huge mistake that I see people make, and I've made way more often than I want to, is the idea is naturally letting career pathing happen based on the interpretations of what people say they want or think they want. Because a lot of people will say they want something that they don't actually want, and they don't even know they're not lying. They just fundamentally don't understand what it's like. And the biggest piece of that is the high performer who says, I want to get into management, because that's the natural career path. That's, the only thing worse than hiring a bad manager is hiring a bad manager who used to be a great individual contributor.
Promoting into incompetence. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you lose a great contributor and you have a shitty manager. Sorry. And that's that doesn't work well. You just can't, but we all tend to do that because that's what people say they want. And it's hard to get them out of those expectations if once they've already gotten there. And so we learned that we had to be very, clear during hiring processes, during onboarding and ongoing, discussions that we are intent on delivering and building career paths that are technically oriented and contribution oriented and ones that are management oriented. And you have to look at, your capabilities and your passions, and we can look at that with you and see which of those paths works for you. And there are people that are capable of both, but it's typically that they slant one direction, or the other. And so that was huge for us when we started just openly and honestly talking about that stuff from the beginning, and not just trying to sell people on something that they were going to come into and then see what naturally happened when we had good people around.
I have two follow-up questions. The first one is, I think it's interesting, or maybe super challenging as well. People that come to an MSP and it's their first job in the industry or first job at an MSP, I think it's hard to anticipate the exploding field of interests that they're going to have within the next 6 to 12 months as they realize like all the different things that exist in our field in this industry that they may be not even aware of, and that may want to start pursuing. And so, I guess calculating or adjusting for that is a challenge I wanted to ask you about. But second, and maybe related to that, is do you guys use any kind of behavioral framework testing thing to understand, people's natural abilities or leanings to help guide them, even if they don't know where they want to be, or if they just don't understand, of course?
Yeah, there's a lot in both those questions. I think that's I jumped in my mind at the second one, but I want to go. I want to answer the first one. Rephrase the first one.
Yeah, the first one is, I think people that join an MSP for the first time maybe had this idea that they want to work in help desk, but suddenly realize that the industry is way wider than they anticipated, and their fields of interest start to explode, and I think they can go in many directions.
How many rhetorical question for people listening, because you're just listening at this point, but how many of you have been in a position where you have that person on your team or in your organization and you say, I don't know how I would survive without them, or they're so critical that the fear of losing them is massive. I've had over a dozen of those people that I didn't know how we were going to survive without, and we're still here and we're bigger, and some of them hurt, but we've never had a linchpin, that's been so critical. But we think we do, because we don't know, the story. We don't want to deal with it, if those people move past or move out. But the more that we build organizations with an understanding that careers are finite, I don't love the fact they're getting more finite, in the current, market, but that's the reality that we're focused on. And so we're not pretending that we live in a different reality. We're not pretending that we're not going to have turnover. We want to have significantly less turnover than everybody else. And we want to have we want to have twice as many candidate applications, half the time to hire, and half the turnover of the industry average. Those are our benchmarks, not can I keep people forever, and, because you're exactly right. There are times when you have opportunities you look at and say, well, yeah, if I was in your shoes, you have to do that, or you've got to make that decision. And that's fine. I can't do everything for everybody, and I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I think that's, so now remind me of the second question.
Behavioral framework or testing, if you guys ever implemented something like that.
It's funny because we've done DISC, assessments. We've done Colby, which I really like a lot, KOLBE. Certain Myers-Briggs strength finder stuff. I mean, over 21 years, we've tried a lot of stuff. Colby's the one that I think that we've found that's really, it provides me, insights that I like, But the thing that we have found more effective than any of that is actually understanding individually where what the trajectory and strengths are, of our employees. And it comes down to two, something that you and I have talked about a lot, psychological safety in an organization where, we actually know what's going on in the heads of our employees. We know what they're trying to do, and they know how we perceive things, and just that transparent, pretty direct communication, but still with empathy. We found is more nuanced than what colors do you have on a Colby assessment, or what's the shape of your line on a disc assessment. Those things aren't bad.
Well, and they're also kind of out of context from organizational needs. If you think about it, they're kind of just uniquely individual.
Yeah.
And so to your point, I think, one of the things I looked at a little while back was Patrick Lencioni, who a lot of people are familiar with. He wrote, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and a number of other books, but he came out with the 6 work genius types framework. And it was such a reduced, simplified way of thinking about people's leanings inside of an organization that I thought was super interesting. And I'll look them up in a second to paraphrase them, but the more and more I think about it, the more things are really, really kind of fit squarely inside of those 6, focuses. And the premise of his framework is that most people have 2 working geniuses, like the things that they are competent at, that they enjoy doing. There's 2 that they are competent at that they may not enjoy, so much. And then 2 things that they're definitely neither good or enjoy doing. And so whenever you can at least detect for those things and pair people in the right types of roles, then you have a better chance, of course. But these things are all sort of dynamic as well. And people do evolve and change, and their interests change. And this is kind of why I set up the question around the exploding sets of interests, because I think, technicians, I've seen people go from like, I wanted to be help desk. And then, a year later, they're doing threat hunting, and there was no way to gauge for that at the hiring process, right?
Yeah, so we use a framework that you and I talked about. We built it, and it's one of the it's the process that I cover in the boss or babysitter talk that I do at some of the conferences, and actually have an on-demand online version of that now. But the idea for me is this: we've got to understand how people think about themselves, both long-term and short-term. Oftentimes, we know people don't always project what's really in their heads. And I joke often that, most of the employment process is based on lies, that resume, job description, both sides of it, both sides of the interview conversation, they're typically not
posturing, a lot of posturing.
Yeah, a lot of posturing. It's never going to be different. You're always going to show the side that, show the pieces that are going to lead to what, you want, or that you feel like are going to lead to what you want. And so it creates this workplace dynamic, that's toxic in many industries, but especially in the MSP industry, where you look at it and people are so intent on showing what's going right. They're so calculated with how they share information, but human nature kicks in and they connect, and they end up with these subcultures and cliques and, real different types of, communication going on in the organization, then and you start to hear things back about things that are happening. Like, wait, what? That's not reality, especially as you scale the organizations and have multiple layers of management. And so that's where, actually being able to get in and say, hey, what do you think you're good at? And what are you trying to get better at? Those are very, very great things to know if you can know them authentically, because what we found is that most people know what they suck at. And instead of, and we don't want them to give up on it,
or what they don't like, which is another side of that.
That's a good point, and so, but if they're trying to pretend to like it to get, to get further ahead, or they're trying to cover up the fact that they're not very good at it. That's in many, cases worse than just not trying. Now, the best thing is when you can make plans to actually build through that together, but our management dynamics, typically don't support that very well. And one of the, an example of that is, if someone screws up something massively, and or even minorly, let's say it's not massive, but just a minor thing, and I walk in and say to them, you did this wrong. This is how you're supposed to do it. This is, that's unacceptable. And you need it to be done that way next time. They might say, okay, and shrink back a little bit. They might get defensive, and they might, or they might try to posture next time and say, oh, the pressure's on. I really got to show that I know how to do this. But if you think about it, it's like, does that person know they made a mistake? And if they generally do, then let them feel the weight of that and connect into that piece. I had a team member, recently, something went wrong. Everyone knew it. Like, it was very easy to see that it was very easy to allow him the space to own it, rather than trying to push him into my view of it, to say, like, you screwed that up, you should have done that, you should have done that. And I said, all right, I'm going to give you space to think about that, because I know you screwed up. But what I would love to see is what you think would work next time, what you think you need to do in some of these spaces, and how can we support you in that? But that needs to come that way. And when they come back with that, I'm really direct if it's wrong. Like, if they look at it and say, well, I should have done this and I should have done this, it's like, well, actually, you should have done like this and you could have done that. So I'm very direct in my feedback around that, but only after they've had space to own it. And so that's how people embrace that type of leadership so well, because they look at it and say, number one, it's okay for me to make a mistake. It's not going to be fatal, but also it's something that I can look at, and I'm going to still have to be accountable for it. But the accountability comes from my view of it, and I get to participate in that, rather than it just be, you screwed up, be smarter next time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too. Like, Brian makes the comment in the chat, if everything is process based and something goes wrong, you either have a problem with the process or a training problem about the process. And I think, there's, in our industry, a lot of desire to remove ambiguity at every possible step of the way, so that you get standardization, you get repeatability, you get consistency. I think all these things are perceived in many ways by clients as a good client experience. But there's always a gray, there's so many gray areas. It's ironic that Greystone Technology is the name of your business, but the gray area, I think, is where people have a little bit of ebb and flow. That decision making prowess, goes up and goes down depending on the day of the year, whatever is happening in their lives, and there's a lot of things that influence that. But I love your perspective of the leadership aspect of that, is the psychological safety. I think as a small shop, you just never think about that soon enough. I think that comes later, as you said, like, hey, we probably should get educated on leadership training and management, and you don't have a management layer probably until you're 10 people to begin with. And so I think there's these dynamics at play.
I'm glad you brought the process piece into it, because, and I'm going to show a slide, a few slides here, if you're all right with that.
Yeah, of course, do it.
Some of the presentation stuff that I do, but who remembers this situation?
Oh yeah.
It was 6 years ago, I think. United passenger was beaten up and drug off a plane. And if you look into the situation, it happened all because everyone at United did everything right. Like, they followed the process perfectly, and the process was very, very, very tight. And so, and the CEO even sent out an internal memo the next day saying, you basically did the right thing, and it didn't help. It's funny because you look at the situation, and a crew had to get from like, I don't know, Kentucky to Las Vegas or something. I don't remember what it was, but point A to point B. And they had a process flow for that. And they had to incentivize people to get off, get off a plane or give up their seat so that they could fit this crew on. And people didn't do that, and they reached the maximum of what they could offer, and they still needed seats to be cleared. And then the next step in the process was, we got to bump people from this, which they have a fully legal right to do. And the last step in the process was, if someone didn't get off the plane, you call security, airport security. Well, it was the airport security guard that beat him up and drug him off the plane, but that guy lost his job after a year of paid leave. So United lost $1 billion in shareholder value in a day because of that. So it does, and the point is not that processes are wrong. And the point in that case, it wasn't probably even that they had the wrong process. It was that they had a process with no leeway. They had no ability for someone to just look at it and say, just think, know what the outcome needs to be. Here's the process, but can you engage in this, a little differently, to support a better outcome? And what's interesting is that they didn't look at, they learned from that $1 billion, value drop, and they started giving their employees more discretion, and I've experienced stuff like United a lot. And they are a better airline because they've looked at it and said, okay, here are the areas where you can have some discretion. You can't have any discretion over how you fly the plane. Like that's like, I don't want that. No one wants that. But I do want them to be able to hold a plane for an extra 90 seconds because they know that there's a passenger coming. I want them to be able to say, you know what, we're going to incentivize and add another $500, to that incentive to get someone off the plane so that we're not, in the news. We're gonna, there's a lot of different aspects to it. And so I think that's what we say a lot. The challenge that we see in that, is, this is the one that makes me laugh, is even when people are given autonomy, they do really stupid stuff sometimes, and so that's the challenge that we all end up having sometimes, is that we really, really need our to be the types of organizations that are very they're trusting. We're infusing common sense into things, and then people just do dumb stuff, and it sets us back, in that. And so we've had to learn to create that balance. Hey, here's the sandbox that you play in. You have decision making autonomy within this space, and and we give them that. So we're not babysitting him in that space, but we're giving him really clear boundaries, and they can earn in certain positions, the ability to have more decision-making, autonomy and all that by demonstrating, that capability. But when you take the human element out of all of it, then it becomes that robotic around a process. It's just not going to work the way that humans need to experience things like even IT support.
Yeah, it's such a difficult thing, Peter, because I've never considered myself a particularly awesome manager. In fact, quite the opposite. And I think it's not so much that I don't have an understanding of people's needs or things like that. I do. Like I clearly have the ability to be critical about this kind of stuff. But it's really interesting that I think as a small IT shop, it just takes us way too long to take ourselves out of trying to be a manager when we're not, or trying to be a leader when we're not, or and it's easy to confuse a bit of this technical capability with leadership of people and addressing their needs, and they're closely related but so different in many respects. And as soon as people's lives start to get a little bit more complex, because it's one thing to hire a kid out of college who has no care in the world, than hiring a 40-something-year-old who has to feed a family and has very different priorities in their life. And so so one has to adjust for all those things, and sometimes we're just not able to do it. So super interesting stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, it's I think those are the kinds of things that I am I get excited about because they move the needle for, for us, for MSPs. And we've spent a lot of time, trying, just building community around these ideas. And then there's some of you, even from the chat with, Ian, seeing that, there's you've seen some of the content before, but the community around this is so important to us because MSPs, we don't compete at our level with a lot of other MSPs. We compete with a lot of internal IT, and there's some MSP competition, but you mentioned Applied Tech, and they merged, acquired Platte River here in Denver. And David from Platte River, I mean, actually, I think probably the top 7 MSPs in Denver, at least from my view. We all went and grabbed drinks two nights ago.
I love that. Love that.
And it was so fun, to sit there and realize like, hey, we've got a lot of respect for each other. We run businesses differently, and I think Luis, you were there one time when Vince, Tinarella from Anchor, came and was like, hey, we're struggling with this client. Like, you guys are more built for this at your scale. I think you could potentially succeed. Let me tell you about them. And and it doesn't always happen that way. We've definitely lost things to each other, and all of that. But the more that we can solve some of these things industry wide, it's going to benefit all of us. And this to me is the biggest thing that continually comes up, is that the more that we scale, the more the harder it is, on the people side of things.
Yeah. So it's funny that I had a list of like 20 questions and we got through 2, but I do have
sounds about right.
I do have a speed round, just because I love digging into people's private lives in this particular fashion. And so I'm just going to go right into the speed round questions. And if, by the way, if anybody has a question for Peter, raise your hand or jump in. But what's the first thing you do when you get into the office every day, Peter?
So my office,
speed round, man. Come on. Okay. One word answers.
Go downstairs to Panera and get coffee.
All right. So no tea, no Jameson in the morning, just coffee.
Yeah.
What book are you currently reading?
I'm trying to remember what I just downloaded. Matter by Peter Sheehan.
Okay. Do you have an industry role model
besides you?
Oh, come on, man. Be serious now.
No, I do. Shit, I don't think about that. I'll come back to that one.
What's the best career or business advice you've ever received? There's one thing that really sticks out all the time.
Sometimes you make good decisions, and sometimes you make your decisions good.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to write that down. What's one MSP industry buzzword you could do without?
VCIO.
Come on, man. That is literally the definition of the industry now.
Or digital transformation, either one of those. My teams love it because we do a lot. In a new chart, we get companies that have a lot of both. And
right.
Yeah.
If you could have dinner with anyone in history, who would it be?
I have a hard time with that question because I don't like having. I wouldn't want to have dinner with people who wouldn't want to have dinner with me. So it gets complicated,
Somebody who likes you is the correct answer then. Yeah. Describe your job in 3 words.
It's my dream job.
What's the most overrated trend in our industry right now, you think?
Private cloud.
Private cloud.
I don't know. Rapid fire stuff's hard.
Morning person or night owl?
Morning. Converted.
Really? From night owl to morning person?
Oh,
I feel like I'm going through that transition too. It's the lack of melatonin, obviously.
Yeah.
What's your go-to productivity hack?
Writing down a to-do list by hand.
By hand specifically?
By hand, to say, I'm not leaving this chair until I do those things and actually physically crossing them
off. What skill do you think is most important in the MSP industry?
Problem solving is not a great one, but mechanical problem solving, the ability to pull something apart, and put it back together.
Mm.
In a situation, and empathy is second one.
Empathy. Yeah. Um, is there a company, if any, that you admire and, in the realistic sense of the word?
That's a great question. We could do a whole other podcast about that, because I'm basically the person that likes to find the problems with everything, in other companies. I absolutely love that piece, looking at it from a, like, all right, everyone says this company is great, so what's wrong with it? You know, kind
Right.
of a thing, which does, that doesn't, it's kind of like the dinner question. I don't have a lot of idols, when it comes to that stuff. I have a lot of people who've really invested in me, which and I've gotten to connect with over time and learn from. And I love that, but I just don't think about it in that frame.
Okay. Fair enough. We'll unpack that one at the next conference. I think it begs a little deeper
Yeah,
digging.
I agree with that, because there are definitely companies to admire. I'm not saying that. I just, in a rapid fire, setting, as, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Is there one thing you wish, or you think back is like, I wish I knew this when I started in the MSP industry?
Yeah, that I didn't know that much, but neither did anybody else. I had a good 10 years of imposter syndrome, because I started when I was young. I didn't finish college, and realized, I brought a perspective that was valuable,
Yeah.
more valuable even than some that had that type of experience and knowledge. And
Well, I think imposter syndrome is something a lot of people are always going through, and so
yeah, don't get me wrong, I have plenty of it now, and just different role.
yeah.
So,
um, what's your go-to podcast right now?
um, listen to All In. I mean, it's kind
Yeah.
of, it's candy podcast. I listen to actually, what's funny is my wife cues up podcasts for me. Um, and they're all the non-technical, non-business ones, and I never even know what they're called. If Books Could Kill is an interesting one. Again, it debunks, like, basically talk shit about, popular books and things like that. So that's right up my alley.
Yeah. Um, how do you unwind after a busy week?
I play ice hockey when I can. But that's usually after a busy day. It's not really a weekend thing. So my wife and I have rocking porches on our front porch. I mean, rocking chairs on our front porch, and we sit there and just pretend that we're old. Have cocktails on the porch.
I love that. Um, what's the future of the MSP industry in one word?
Um, Fewer,
Fewer, it's just fewer.
fewer. It seems gonna be hard to be so
Yeah.
fragmented and so small.
Yeah. There was a question, and we're right at the top of the hour, so this is a perfect time to ask it. Thanks, Ian, for the question. I saw you at IT Nation London back in March. The question is, do you see any major differences between the way UK and US MSPs think and operate in terms of looking after their people?
Yeah, I think that um, there are some different pieces in the UK. My broad view is that there's a little less psychological safety that happens, in organizations in the UK, and has become a little bit more normalized in some spaces of the US. But we're not talking about magnitudes of order different. I think the core challengers are still very much the same.
Yeah. I mean, culturally, I feel like there's a lot of similarities, and the IT industry as a whole, I feel like there's a big gap that is bridged because we all are in the same places. We're listening to the same people. We're going to the same conferences. We're kind of buying from the same vendors. And I think a lot of that culture gap is bridged that way. But, other industries have that interesting challenge of, their unique ecosystems are kind of separate from the ecosystems of other, countries and places. But ours is very much kind of like melded together that way. So I think that's interesting.
It's funny. One quick thing. Speaking in the UK is very different, because no one laughs at anything, even if they think it's funny. um, and so they're like stone faced, and jokes like, come on,
Yeah,
oh, you were hilarious. It's like, well,
the
you
stoicism.
didn't
Yeah.
laugh about it, but it's like, and it's like, oh, like they'll give no feedback, and then they'll submit the things. Oh, best presentation I've ever seen. 3 out of 5 stars.
That's awesome. Well, Peter, I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Ian.
I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for sharing a bit of your time to come and hang out and have this very open-ended, interesting discussion. Lots more to unpack. Hope I can have you back.
Yeah,
And
so it sounds like we have more questions to go through, and I got a couple of those rapid fire ones that I got to think of quick answers to.
yeah,
Over.
yeah. At least you got Ian to chuckle a bit, which is great. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll catch you next week. I have who do I have next week? Chris Weiser is coming on next week. I got him to agree to come and talk a little bit about mindset, which is something he's super passionate about, and hope we can get into a discussion about that. In the meantime, thanks everybody. The recording will be up. We'll send an email on Monday as we usually do. Dave, thanks for popping in to say hi, and everybody enjoy your weekend, and thanks again. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.